How would you like to die? And then that's a hypothetical question, not a threat. Don't demonetize me, YouTube. I'm so sorry. Most people would probably like to die peacefully in their sleep. The more histrionic among you may want to go down in an epic blaze of glory befitting an action movie, such as wrestling a bear while falling out of a plane. Whatever your answer, the idea of a machine disassembling you atom by atom probably wasn't the first thing that came to mind. Or maybe it was, after our video about the transporter that is actually a death machine. Check that out after watching this video, why not? But no, today we're not talking about teleporters, we're talking about Grey Goo. The term Grey Goo was first used by American engineer K. Eric Drexler, a pioneer of nanotechnology. In his 1986 book, Engines of Creation, Grey Goo is presented briefly as a thought experiment. In 2004, Drexler would again speak on the topic, stating, "I wish I never used the term Grey Goo." We're sorry, Drexler, it's the title of this bloody video, isn't it? We can't blame him, because it's a pretty stupid name. Aside from sounding a little gross, the name leads to a lot of misconceptions. Goo is a rather evocative word. You're probably thinking of some thick, viscous substance that is grey in colour, and that's certainly what the name would imply, but it's not at all what Drexler was talking about. He used the term Grey Goo as a way to describe the material as bland, uninspiring, and possibly even worthless. So, what exactly was he talking about, and how could it mean the end of all life on Earth? Goo in you. Grey Goo refers to self-replicating nanobots, because of course it does. Specifically, it refers to self-replicating nanobots that have somehow gotten out of control either from a programming error or a malicious design. Presumably, nanobots would be designed to require special raw materials in order to replicate themselves. As such, they would only replicate so long as those raw materials were available. I can see where this is going. You're the raw material, aren't you? We are. Oh, we're all screwed. However, if there was the right kind of error in the programming, or more accurately, the wrong kind of error, then nanobots could instead use materials indiscriminately to replicate themselves. Let's say these evil little machines were made out of carbon. Uh-oh. I know what I'm made out of. And they began tearing materials apart to get more carbon with which to replicate themselves. Look, carbon accounts for around 25% of biomass on Earth. Humans may only be 18.5% carbon, but we're going to assume that you need that bits of carbon to live. Yeah, I don't want a robot. I don't want a little robot taking 18.5% of me away. It's not going to work out well. It's going to be messy. Look, humans invent shit that can kill ourselves all the time, so why should this fill us with any more existential dread than any other technology? And the answer is everyone's favorite source of seemingly impossible facts: exponential growth. Exponents may be the most terrifying thing to exist in the universe, beside rabies, of course, because of the dangers that they can pose. All it would take is one nanobot that was indiscriminately replicating itself to cause a world-ending event. When Drexler originally did his maths, he used the example of the bots replicating every 1,000 seconds, but we'll just say 20 minutes. It's a slightly slower pace, but it's easier to conceptualize than tens of thousands of seconds. But after 20 minutes, our one malfunctioning robot would have created a second robot. Yay, not scary! After 40 minutes, those two would have created 4. 1 hour in, we're up to 8 robots. And you can see how this begins to go and how we all end up a big mess with 18.5% of us missing. And look, if 8 doesn't seem scary yet, well, then welcome to your first lesson in exponential growth, because after 12 hours, the number of nanobots would have increased to 69 billion, which is terrifying. A little over 2 days of this, and the nanobots would weigh more than the entire mass of the planet. Exponentials, why? Obviously, that last part is impossible since the robots couldn't create matter out of nothing, but it shows just how quickly a scenario like this could get out of hand. It would only take 2 days for this Grey Goo to destroy all life on Earth. And by the time we were even aware there was a problem, it would probably already be too late. This scenario is referred to as ecophagy, a term coined by Robert Freitas to describe the literal eating of an entire ecosystem. The term was used in Freitas' paper, Some Limits to Global Ecophagy by Biovorous Nanoreplicators with Public Policy Recommendations in the year 2000. That's a hell of a title, mate. Look, and catchy titles aside, this was the first real scientific look at the concept of Grey Goo. The exponential growth we described previously is what could happen under ideal conditions, and it was just to prove a point about how terrifying the possibility could be. But here, in the real world, ideal conditions don't actually exist, not even for microscopic robots. So let's examine just how real the threat of being disassembled by nanobots actually is. Limits to global ecophagy. Freitas' paper goes through a lot of maths to explore some of the worst case scenarios possible for Grey Goo in the real world. He starts with the same premise we did, that the robots could be made out of carbon, but he believed that 100 seconds was a reasonable amount of time for one of these nanobots to replicate itself. That's an order of magnitude faster than we'd originally looked at, but seeing as these don't actually exist, we can't yet say for sure how fast they would be able to replicate. Using 100 seconds as the time for replication rather than 20 minutes, it would take only 2 hours for all life on Earth to be consumed. Yeah, in less than time it takes you to watch a single scene of Quentin Tarantino dialogue, every person, plant, and other stuff like diamonds would all be deconstructed and replaced with nanobots. But again, that replication is happening under ideal conditions, and Freitas wanted to find just how terrifying this scenario would be once we factor in logistical reality. Now, there are a couple of obvious things that probably sprung to mind that would prevent a sustained rate of exponential growth. The first is the manner in which the swarm of nanobots grows. All carbon on Earth isn't evenly distributed, and even if it was, our massive Grey Goo would still need to find its way to that carbon. The original calculations assumed that these self-replicators are constantly working to replicate themselves, which means they are perpetually positioned directly next to the necessary raw materials. That's simply not possible, especially as the creation of more machines in the same area will quickly use all the available carbon, and then they'll have to go searching for more. It would be nice to think that the existence of oceans would help slow down the process of the Grey Goo, as there's all of that sweet H2O separating continents of humans from one another. Unfortunately, this wouldn't slow down at all. Not only is the ocean absolutely full of life that could be disassembled to build more nanobots, but there's also 39,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide dissolved in the oceans, most of which resides at the surface of the water. Brilliant. These nanobots would likely be so light that they could walk on the water, which is good for them, but it's really bad for us. The Earth is still a big place though, so if the nanobots were traveling on foot, that travel speed would be an important limiting factor. And once we take into account geography and the shape of the swarm, Freitas did the math on a more realistic worst-case scenario. If a single self-replicating nanobot was released into the atmosphere, it could use carbon dioxide in the air to start replicating before the Grey Goo was blown around the world to spread more efficiently. He found that when we account for these factors, the estimated time it would take for Grey Goo to consume our planet is 30 days, and that is still terrifying. But it's not 2 hours terrifying. If we had some kind of plan in place for this sort of scenario, we would have enough time to implement it and stop the end of civilization. There is one other extremely important limiting factor in this, which is what Freitas referred to as thermal pollution. Thanks to the laws of thermodynamics, the process of converting biomass into robots is going to release some amount of waste heat into the environment. Even if the process is as efficient as possible, there's no way to avoid at least some waste heat from being created without violating the laws of physics. We can handwave the design of the nanobots a little bit and propose that they're built from diamond to make them less susceptible to the heat, but you know what isn't made out of diamonds? People and trees and everything else made out of carbon that the nanobots are going to consume. Well, other than actual diamonds, but that's less. This thermal pollution created by a massive swarm of Grey Goo would be a massive problem. Even if they were operating at a high level of efficiency that is only theoretically possible, the heat they produced would be enough to ignite and ultimately vaporize all of their raw materials. To combat this, the nanobots would have to replicate at an even slower rate than the 30 days that it would take them when we ignored thermal pollution. This results in two possible scenarios. The nanobots could continue to replicate at the fastest possible rate that won't ignite all of the fuel. If this was the case, the heat signature of these swarms would be able to be detected by satellites keeping an eye out for them. We don't have any satellites that are doing this right now, but nanobots aren't a real thing yet either, so breathe a sigh of relief. Once they are, undoubtedly safeguards like this will be put into place. Alternatively, the nanobots could replicate at such a slow speed that the heat signature from thermal pollution would be undetectable. If this were the case, then that 30-day estimate suddenly slows down all the way to 20 months. And this suddenly sounds much less scary and more preventable. Humanity may have already destroyed itself in less than 20 months from now, so a theoretical 20-month doomsday clock that we can counteract doesn't sound so bad after all. Of course, whatever countermeasures exist to stop such a swarm of nanobots, they better be flawless. If even a single nanobot survives, the whole process just starts all over again, and that's bad. Should we be worried? In the short term, you got nothing to worry about. Neither nanobots nor self-replicating machines actually exist yet. Drexler argued that there's no reason to even create self-replicators anyway, as they would be needlessly complex and inefficient compared to a dedicated factory for making the robot. He also argued that instead of pursuing this technology, we could just not pursue it. If we never invent it, we never have to worry about any of this killing us. right? Unfortunately, that's just not how humanity works, mate. To start with, we want to invent these things so we can invent other stuff. Self-replicating machines are an important component for building a Dyson swarm, or really for building anything out in space. Also, the idea already exists, so someone is going to do it just to say that they can. Again, humanity 101. Alternatively, someone may develop the technology with calamitous intent. Grey Goo is a potentially terrifying thing that we'd like to avoid, but if a straight-up psychopath were to either invent self-replicating nanobots or get their hands on the technology, they could intentionally create Grey Goo rather than it resulting from a programming error. In this case, the thermal pollution may not even be seen as a limiting factor, and the robots could be pushed to their reproductive limits. After all, it doesn't matter whether trillions of robots disassemble you atom by atom or you simply burst into flames before vaporizing entirely. Either way, you'd still be dead. Even though the potential threat is real, the apocalyptic scenarios are unlikely and almost certainly preventable. We shouldn't be that worried, but we should worry just a little bit. Even if there is almost no chance the nanotechnology will result in Grey Goo, there is still a chance. Many believe that it is imperative that we take these low-probability, high-impact scenarios seriously, as just a matter of ethics. When nuclear weapons were first developed, scientists seriously considered the possibility that Earth's entire atmosphere could be ignited by the first nuclear test. It may sound silly to us now, and perhaps in the distant future, Grey Goo will sound equally silly, but we can't just ignore it either. If we aren't prepared to immediately handle the problem should it arise, the effects would be irreversible. Let us consider an immediate example. Faster than 20 months that would make the heat waste undetectable, but slower than the maximum pace of 30 days. If Grey Goo were replicating at a pace that would take 5 months to consume everything, how long would it take before we noticed? And once we noticed, how long would it take us to solve the problem? Even at the slower pace, we're still dealing with exponential growth. So every extra minute it takes to stop the problem means more and more damage done. We may have safeguards in place to stop this runaway replication, but the damage that happens before we stop it can't be undone. We can't turn deactivated nanobots back into cows and trees and people, so we really need to hope it never happens in the first place. Fortunately, if the British government is any authority on the matter, then this is all future humanity's problem. In 2004, back when King Charles III was but the humble Prince of Wales, he called upon the British Royal Society to investigate the potential dangers posed by nanotechnology in Grey Goo. They concluded that the technology was far too in the future to be of any concern right now, so there was no need to worry or do anything. And then Charles slept better at night. And if history has taught us nothing else, it's that society deciding, f it, that's our grandkids' problem. I mean, that's never ended poorly, right? We're fucked. We're so fucked. Shit.